Sure, you can have, and then I have what I don't have with me today is California. So I have Pacific Northwest, California, and then for the tropics around the world, I did that. And these are co-productions in the Pacific Northwest and California I did alone. So if I would say anything, of course I point that out. But if you happen to, but I think Robert Rogers we should mention because he's really he has that fungal pharmacy book out. So he's really one of the most knowledgeable people when it comes to medicinal mushrooms in North America.
That's great. I've used this all the time when we go hiking. I mean, I rely on this. It's really cool to be able to see. So the feed is on. We're live. Daniel Winkler, thanks so much for coming on. Thanks so much for being here.
Well, thanks for inviting me.
Now you got your daughters are in town, so you got a lot of family stuff going on and everything like that, which is great. So you gave an event. First of all, I can't remember where I found your guide, but somewhere on the web. And then you were doing a talk in Seattle, so I went to your event, and it blew me away. This was a couple months ago?
Months ago.
Early October, something like that. Peak of kind of the mushroom season. And you know, since that talk, I've been learning how to harvest mushrooms in the wild, which my wife was like so skeptical about because I think, like anything in life, right? Like if you don't have a mentor or if it's not part of your family and upbringing, you get scared about mushrooms because we hear they're poisonous.
Well, this is part of British heritage, fungophobia, the fear of mushrooms. And it's so deeply ingrained and that people think, you know, touching a mushroom could poison you. It's totally absurd. I mean, tell me anything that works that way, you know? And I always joke around. It's just like holding hands doesn't get you pregnant, right? So touching a mushroom is not a problem. You have to ingest them, and then you can get their benefits or their toxicity. But touching or looking at them, you know, it's not going to harm your being.
Right. But knowing what to look for, I think, is key for some people. And then it's just a learning lesson, and one of you call them LBMs. I'm like, what is an LBM? You know, these little brown mushrooms are everywhere. So when I first started getting into this, I was picking all these mushrooms, like that one might be psychedelic, that might be this, and they're like, no, there's just LBMs. There's a million of them. You're never going to find any good ones.
So the little brown mushrooms is really the curse of knowing your mushrooms, because there's so many of them and it's so hard to tell them apart. And in general, you know, mushrooms are so seasonable. So a tree is there 24/7, and it's much easier to figure out what a tree is when there's leaves on there. But a mushroom is there maybe for a week, maybe for a month, maybe even for a day, some of them. And, you know, you don't catch them in the right time, you got to wait a year again or 3 years, you know. So it's really, that makes it so much harder. And then the little mushrooms, there's just so many of them. And you really got to look closely and keep looking so that you get an eye for it. And you don't, I mean, my example is like eating blackberries, right? You know, a blackberry, you eat a blackberry and you don't worry about all the deadly berries out there, but you know your blackberry. And the same with mushrooms. If you want to eat a mushroom or use a mushroom for healing, you got to know what you use. You don't need to know all the others, but really good information is that you know if there is dangerous lookalikes. So how well do you need to look to be safe? And that's really important information. When it comes to little brown mushrooms, psychedelics, there is deadly little brown mushrooms, and unfortunately that has happened. And so you got to be careful. But when you look at the statistics, I have no idea how many people are out there picking for contraband, right? We don't, luckily, you know, hardly anybody gets.
We don't hear much.
So it's not rocket science, but, you know, just like most things in life, it pays off to know what you do.
Totally.
And you know, but no point to be irrational regarding the danger, you know.
Yeah. Well, I think it's important for people to understand some of the medicinal properties of the mushrooms, and what we can kind of get into that. But to identify them yourselves, folks, at home, I think is key, because, and we see this all the time now, businesses are putting, and companies, it's great that they're doing this, but they're putting like chaga in tea and lion's mane in tea, and there's probably just a very, very small amount. But if you know what you're looking for, you go out and either grow it yourself, like we have here, some shiitake and other stuff over there, or find it in the forest, which is great. So it's like a free way to get all these healing properties of the mushrooms.
Right. And I mean, of course, the free side is a nice aspect, but there's a whole different level of connecting to nature and being out there, you know, breathing fresh air, being among other beings. There's a whole chapter in Japanese medicine, forest medicine. Maybe you had already a session about that, but that your antibody count goes up just by being a couple hours out in the forest, you know. And so don't underestimate the part just by being out there looking for mushrooms and enjoying yourself in nature and really coming back to where we came from originally. I mean, you know, we grew up in an environment, you know, we grew up surrounded by other life forms and also by all kinds of viruses, bacteria, germs, all that kind of stuff that builds and trains our immune system. And where we see when we cut our immune system off from that, we cause a lot of problems. Of course, these things can be also very problematic just by how they are. I don't want to glorify the past, but we got to understand the balance. And just to be out in the forest looking for your own mushrooms, you know, and then when you know what you have and you're lucky enough to find them, bring them home, cook them. I mean, it's such a beautiful feeling, and especially also for families. It's so nice, you know, with your little kids. They'll do better than you finding them, and they learn very quick to identify it. It's, as I say, it's not rocket science, you know. You just gotta have a couple things that you know, and you gotta know is there dangerous lookalikes. But you know, like for the chanterelle out here, we don't have any seriously dangerous lookalikes. And the few things you can confuse them with, they won't do more than upset your digestive system. And so, or you still can enjoy them. So, you know, it's not very dangerous.
Yeah. That's such a great point, though, you bring up about just being out in nature. And I think they call it Shinrin Roku. That's kind of the technical name in Japanese and so forth.
Yeah.
And anyone listening right now, if you just, or listening on iTunes, if you just Google forest bathing in PubMed or Google Scholar, there's actually a huge body of research, like you said, that they track people, even in an urban setting where there's a park. Like if you track, I think, like you said, T cell count, natural killer cell activity, cortisol. And so just, you know, and oftentimes if we don't have a goal to get outside, like some people track their steps, so that enforces them to go outside. But if you have the goal to, hey, we're going to collect mushrooms today, that forces you and to get outside and start looking around. And what I was, you know, looking for chanterelles, we're not going to be right on the main trail. You have to like go off the trail, which was so cool for my daughter because we're climbing over stumps and going down and around. My neighbor Jared's really into it, and so we brought his kid too, and they had the best time. It's like all day, no screens, no candy, no crap. Like, where's the TV? It was like no questions like that. They were just like, hey, look at this, look at this. They had like the best time. So
it's a deep-seated thing in us. You know, we've been doing that for millions of years, foraging for our food, and you know, we can so quickly reconnect it. It's so much fun. So, I mean, on one side, I shouldn't be saying these things because when I moved here to the Seattle area over 20 years ago, it was so easy to find so many chanterelles, you know. And now I've been the last 15 years by now educating people about it as part of the Puget Sound Mycological Society, and many places have mycological societies. That's a good place if you're interested in mushrooms to connect with people where you will learn and get help. Anyways, we've been training so many people, and the competition is very evident. So now you got to go the extra mile, but they're still there. And I mean, especially here in the Pacific Northwest, we have such an abundance of edible mushrooms, and most of them will still go back to Mother Nature. And there's other areas where it's much harder, but out here I was just incredible when I came here that all this bounty in the woods and hardly anybody was out there looking for them. It's like, you know, that's that's such a pity. But on the other side, it was so nice, you know.
For yourself, yeah.
Yeah.
It's like telling everyone where the best fishing hole is, right?
Right.
You go back next year, you're not going to catch any fish.
No, you talk about your fishing, but not about your fishing hole.
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know, that's, yeah.
That is pretty funny. I mean, that's been kind of the hard part. I mean, I guess I understand, but as like a newbie getting into this, you kind of want to know the environment at first to look for, maybe a good spot to get your feet wet, feel comfortable. But I've had trouble getting exact locations from people.
No, that's the exact locations. That's asking for too much. But you ask for habitat, you ask for season, for altitude, such things, you know, and then you got to put your time into it. And that's you know, just find some friends, make friends, you know, and there's a lot of information out there. I mean, even, you know, it's I mean, we wanna help other people have the joy too, and not just you know, it's all for myself. You know, I mean, much more joy if you share it.
Oh, totally. It's fun to go with people for sure. So maybe what are some of the, I mean, one of the things that struck me is the immune beneficial properties, and maybe we can pull up a mycelium. Yeah. We won't tell you exactly what this mycelium is or what it will fruit into be, but one thing you struck me is you said mushrooms grow in like the crappiest environments on Earth, kind of like
they can be in any environment. There's everywhere is mushrooms. The restricting factor is they need moisture. So the fruiting body of a mushroom is 90% water usually. So, but when there's water, like even all the deserts, when there's rain, there's mushrooms fruiting. But of course, if it hasn't rained in 6 months, the mushrooms are not going to do much. They're dormant. They wait for that water, and so they just feed wherever there's dead biomass. Mushrooms are the ones who will eat it, and just like animals, they feed on other organisms, not like plants that could turn sunlight into sugars through photosynthesis. They feed on something else, just like animals. And in the past, we made this big difference. Oh, they are the destruents. They break down, and the animals are the consumers. What's the difference? We break things down as soon as we have them in our stomach. And mushrooms, okay, they don't have a stomach. They will release enzymes out of their hyphae. So here the mycelium, this white mesh you can see here, is made up out of totally fine one-cell wide threads. They're called a hyphae. And the hyphae, they connect and make a web, and that's called the mycelium. Mm-hmm. And that mycelium is what is the body of a mushroom. We get hooked looking at the fruiting body of a mushroom here, but that is just the reproductive organ. And it doesn't work like with animals. They just produce a little spore, and the spore will hit the ground somewhere, and then it will grow the hyphae. And then 2 spores might hook up, and that's when Mama and Papa come together in the fungal kingdom, but they have sometimes 547 genders. So all our idea of gender does not work with mushrooms. It's usually then there's 558 versions of a certain DNA set there, and then 557 can connect and one is excluded. So it's very different than animals. But so the spores are produced in the fruiting bodies, but the real body, we compare it to the apple and the tree. So this is the apple, and in here is the tree, full of that white mesh, the mycelium. And the mycelium doesn't have a body like we have that is protected by skin. I think there's 7 layers that protect us from the environment, and we do monitor very closely what goes in, right? So mushrooms, they don't have a digestive system. They just are one cell wide, and it's like a tube. And they can release enzymes through type of pores into the environment. And then these enzymes will break down the biomass. And then they will absorb the broken down material. And so the body of the mushroom is always growing into the food. You know, it grows towards the food. It will check out around it. Where is there food? It's not. Oh, there's something to eat, and then, you know, I'll take over that space. And So it is completely exposed in the environment. And, you know, we all know the soil, you know, you dig it up and there's millions of microbes in there. And other organisms who all would love to feed on the mushroom, because a fruiting body like that is, when you dry it, it's about 30% is protein. So, you know, and everybody's after protein, right? And so the mushrooms got to be really strong, have a really strong immune system to protect themselves, because they can't run. They just can make themselves completely impalatable. And like, you mess with us, we'll poison you. And so they have a lot of immune power to defend themselves. And that's part why mushrooms are so good for us, because a lot of these things stimulate our immune system and also support our immune system. And so that's part of the root why mushrooms are beneficial for us. The other thing is that it doesn't matter really which mushroom you take, which culture of a mushroom. They all are antibacterial, antiviral, you know, they have to defend themselves against the other organisms. And then, of course, some are much more powerful than others. They have developed more strength in immune capacity, and that's, of course, the ones we do select as medicinal mushrooms.
Cordyceps and things like that.
Yeah, cordyceps, reishi, ganoderma here. You know, that's just...
that's ganoderma?
That's ganoderma, yeah.
Okay.
So that is Ganoderma oregonense. That's our local Pacific Northwest variety of reishi, or lichens, the Chinese name. And that has the longest written record as a medicinal in human culture, because the Chinese wrote about it, I think, like 2,500 years ago or so. It's in one of the early lists of Chinese herbs or medicinals. And but they already found in the enamel of Neanderthals, they found traces of mushroom consumption.
Wow.
So, I mean, you know, it's most mammals have there's certain seasons where they eat mushrooms.
Yeah.
And it's just when you grow up in British informed culture that mushrooms are this
Poisonous.
useless poison thing, you stay away. And, you know, these things is like, really, wow, you know, and now they've been part of our sustenance from, you know, forever.
Yeah, that is so cool. Let's scoot the bench just a little bit. I want to make sure that everyone can hear you totally good.
Okay.
Daniel, it's just amazing. So to go back to what you were saying, because you know, this high intensity health being like a health channel,
yeah.
A lot of people are interested in the health and maybe more so now the psychoactive properties of the mushrooms. But is it the beta glucans and the sugars and the enzymes and so forth that the mushroom uses for itself to grow and thrive? When we eat that, is that kind of the mechanisms that...
The polysaccharide, like the beta-glucans, chitin, and so on, that's actually what protects the mushroom. So that's part of the cell walls, and it makes it tough. Okay. So mushrooms are made out of chitin, just like insects, and which is a polysaccharide, and so it's somewhat a little similar to cellulose and lignin, and it's very complex and very tough. And while for the mushroom it's protective, but in our system, it helps our immune system. And also there's some drug in Eastern Europe, I think in Ukraine, after the Chernobyl accident, they looked into how do we get the radiations out of human bodies again. And they figured out that chitin is a very helpful substance. So they would give just straightforward fungal chitin to people, and that would somehow bind with the radioactive heavy metals and take them out of the body. Wow. So, you know, that's one of the aspects. So, the medicinal aspects, there's of course these polysaccharides that often just make the structure of the mushrooms, but there's a whole other array of active ingredients that also then would have, like in the ganoderma, there's the ganodermic acid and so on. There's all the vitamins. You can find all the vitamins in mushrooms, some of them in low dose, but like vitamin D, whenever you pick a fresh mushroom and you put it out in the sun for drying, and it doesn't need to be the whole the full time of drying, but you put it out like half an hour or so. Ergosterol, which is on the cell walls, will turn into vitamin D, and so and that will be stable for years. So you can cover your vitamin D need by just eating mushrooms that were dried in the sun. Just like we need the sun to produce our own vitamin D, mushrooms can do that too, and drying them in the sun or exposing them to intense UV light for a short time. Somebody's working on that, but I don't see it commercially available, or I didn't follow up. That could provide us with the vitamin D.
Wow, that's really neat. Is that what you recommend, drying them out to preserve them?
Yeah, I mean, like when I pick morels, which usually peak season out here, fire morels is May, June, then it's very easy to dry them in the sun. Now, drying our king boletes, porcini, which let's say I find them in October, then drying them in the sun gets much harder because we don't have the sunshine anymore. You pick your porcini in Colorado when they fruit in late August, well, you have all the sunshine you need. So, we get a lot of choice edibles here, but a whole bunch of them don't happen when the sun really has a lot of power anymore to dry them. But, I'm not clear about if it's good enough to put dry mushrooms in the sun and you'll still turn the ergosterol into vitamin D, or if it should be a fresh mushroom. So I gotta look deeper into that. But for sure, fresh mushrooms into the sun, so will give you vitamin D.
That's good to know. Okay, what I've noticed with these different conch mushrooms is they get really dry and really hard. So it's kind of hard to use them for medicinal teas and things if you don't use them right away. Is there a workaround? Because to me, as a newbie to this, admittedly, they were very easy to identify in terms of like compared to like non-lookalikes. And of course you do have some lookalikes to look out for, but I found these everywhere.
Well, this is the red-belted conch you have there. And red-belted conch is up here in the Seattle area and the Pacific Northwest, the most common conifer digester. But also in the eastern North America, it will also grow on hardwoods, so not necessarily conifers. And I wouldn't say, I mean, really easy to identify is ganoderma, is the reishi, and interestingly, you didn't catch that, right? And it is so shiny and bright red when fresh. Yes, so toughness, it's an issue, and part of that is the best thing is when you find them to slice them right afterwards, and then the smaller the pieces, the less likely you're gonna break your blender or whatever equipment you're gonna use. I once broke the spice grinder of my wife. Super glue fixed it. Yeah, but it's the blade came off, and my Cuisinart, the plastic melted because the material of the ganoderma got caught between the blade and the plastic.
Oh my gosh.
And then it got so hot that the plastic melted. And that's not how you make medicine, right? With melting plastic on your substrate. So when you find them and you have made sure that you have the mushroom you're really looking for, then the sooner you process them, slice them in pieces, the less likely is you gotta hurt yourself. I don't want to know how many people hurt themselves trying to make their own medicine out of these tough things. I came up with the idea, and I haven't used it yet, but I have a bunch of tough mushrooms I didn't process right away, and I think I'm gonna use a planer. But then planer? I gotta catch all the debris because it would be all over the house. So the idea I came up with, I get out the tent and sit inside the tent with a planer, and then I can lift up the tent in the end and shake it and get my mushroom out, right? So coming these days, I'm gonna do it, but just be careful, don't cut off your fingers in the process because they're tough. So the earlier you address the conchs, the easier it is. But once they're hard, and part of that is yeah, it's just that's a challenge, and you want to clean them too. You don't want to process here, like you still have some old bark on there and so on.
Get that off.
Yeah, so you want to make sure that you just have actually the fungus and not old biomass.
You think that's the red worm polypore?
Yes, and here you see the dark reddish, and then it turns black with age. We have here, so two versions of the same thing, and the test to be positive, and then you see the white tubes, and then when you smell it, smelling your mushrooms and tasting is really helpful. And let's see, too old. But when they're fresh, there's a fruity odor, and you taste them, they are really bitter. I mean, bitter is good for us, right? Bitter medicine, when they did placebo tests with medicine, bitter medicine was always much more successful than non-bitter medicine. And so anyways, they will have a little citrusy odor and sour and really bitter. And so it's good when you taste these things. You can taste any mushroom as long as you don't swallow, okay? So tasting a mushroom really helps you to get to know your mushrooms, but you cannot swallow. You shouldn't swallow many of them because some of them, they will get you sick or they could kill you. Well, I don't know if a little taste will kill you. I don't think. Depends how little, but even the deadly death caps or so. I mean, it's just don't swallow unless it's an edible mushroom that can be eaten raw. And in general, we suggest all mushrooms should be cooked. And it's not just to detoxify them, which definitely applies like for morels. Morels are, here I have a picture of a morel, easy to identify. And the morels are really toxic when you eat them raw. So you should never do that. And you need to cook them. And once you cook them, you render them edible. And that applies to a whole bunch of mushrooms. And there's a few exceptions, like porcini, most people can enjoy raw. But others do not eat raw mushrooms unless you know that you can eat that species raw.
Interesting.
And then also the cooking helps your system to digest them, since they're made out of chitin, which is tough. And many humans don't have chitinase, the enzyme to break down chitin. Cooking them softens them up and makes the content in the cells available to you. So rather overcook your mushrooms than undercook your mushrooms, because then you get much more out of the mushroom.
Wow, that's really interesting. One of the tips that you had for cooking them is cooking them dry without any water or anything for about 5 minutes or so, and then you add the spices?
You can tell, well, that's Pacific Northwest again, where we have a lot of rain in our mushroom season. And when the mushrooms are really wet or just very fresh, then you can start out cooking them without oil, because they will release their water. And then once they release their water, you collect that water, put it aside, and save it for the sauce later on. And then once they start sticking to the frying pan, that's when you add your oil. And so you really can cut down the time it takes to cook them and process them. And you have afterwards all that nice liquid you then use for your sauce. So really dry frying, we call it, is a good thing to know.
Yeah, that's great. We've been like mincing them up, putting them in we use like a either stainless steel or a cast iron skillet, and it works well, because before they were soggy, like it didn't really, I didn't know what we were doing, and then it was hard to enjoy them. So just that alone is just a wonderful tip, guys, for cooking the mushrooms. And I don't know about...
And don't put too many at a time in a frying pan, because then you end up with mush, and we don't enjoy really the mush. You make a soup or sauce, well, it doesn't matter that much. But, if you fry them and you caramelize them a little bit, you get so much more out of a mushroom. So don't pile them too high in your frying pan, and then... add the oil at the point where they start sticking.
Great tip. I know, Daniel, you travel all around. We're lucky here in the Northwest. We have like PCC, the co-op, and so forth, and they have a lot of, like, let's see, blue oyster. I know they have chanterelles locally, shiitake. Sometimes they have maitake. Sometimes they have lion's mane as well. But have you been to other parts of the U.S. or world where grocery stores have, or should we go for like Asian food marts or something if people are interested?
Well, I mean, every store has button mushrooms, and which already have a lot of benefits. I remember I was at a medicinal mushroom conference where there was a team, I don't know, somewhere out of the US showed up, and they weren't even researching mushrooms. They were researching vegetables. They weren't, okay, we want to say which one of the vegetables we buy in a store does, what was it about? Antioxidants or whatever, you know, and they just threw in the mushroom as the control group.
Oh, man.
So they didn't, the mushrooms, no, they don't do anything. It turned out the mushroom was the most active of all of them. So they were blown away and went to the medicinal mushroom conference after their great finding. So button mushrooms already have a lot of benefits, much better though when organic, because as a mushroom grower, when you grow millions of mushrooms in one space, and you get some kind of a virus or whatever, then it's a challenge. So
they spray pesticides and whatnot.
Yeah. So there is not everything used in growing mainstream mushroom is healthy for you. So if you get organic, go for it for sure. And then here when it's season, we have the chanterelles for sale. Oh, I should say. So the big difference is, okay, we have mushrooms, like the shiitake here, that's saprobic, meaning it grows on dead biomass. And that's the ones you easily can cultivate, or you have a chance cultivating. So in the stores, you see that in the oyster mushrooms, in the shiitake, maitake, and the lion's mane, you also can cultivate on dead biomass.
The oyster too, yeah?
Yeah,
okay.
All the oysters. Now, the chanterelles and the morels and the king boletes porcini, matsutake, they are all root associated. So they don't break, their main business is not to break down biomass anymore. They pretty much retired that function. And that's also reflected in their genetics, that they miss a lot of the genes that would be coding the enzymes that do that kind of work. What they are doing now, they are basically the extension of the root system of a tree. So many of our trees, everything in the pine family, in the beech family, oak family, they take up to 90% of the water through the mushroom. It's the fungus feeding the tree. And the tree even returning up to 60% of their sugars to the mushroom. And they do that after they did their first growth spur in May, June, you know, when the trees are really active and the leaves come out of its deciduous, and they do the early wood. And then after they did the first big growth spur, then they start sharing the sugars. So that's why in many parts in the Northern Hemisphere, we have a mushroom season, not in May or June, but it is, you know, late June, July, August, and then into fall. And here in the Pacific Northwest, because we have these dry summers, we're still a Mediterranean climate, same as California, you know, these dry summers force the mushrooms into fall. But that's easy for the trees then to provide the sugars late in the year.
And in Colorado, in the flip side, they have the monsoon, so that's why in August you get...
Right, exactly. So whenever you have summer rains, and we have neither monsoon nor thunderstorms. And you know, most areas in the Northern Hemisphere do have you know, there's thunderstorms or there's moisture is often coming in the summer, but Mediterranean climates are the big exception, and the mushrooms adjusted for that.
Interesting.
So we were, okay, I came from the saprobic mushrooms that break down biomass, and then the mycorrhizal, the root-associated mushrooms that are just symbionts. And the trees and most plants rely in some way on mushrooms. Like orchids cannot grow without fungus. They have these tiny seeds. I mean, just like, you know, really tiny seeds, because they don't store any nutrients. They got to find the fungus that will feed the tiny seeds. Wow. So, you know, instead of making 100 seeds that have food resources, they make 1,000 seeds that have no food, but they got to find that fungus.
That's amazing.
So it's, and that's like, they're very late in the evolution of plants, the orchids showed up, and they're just, okay, we don't need all these reserves.
We have the mushrooms too.
Right. And I mean, that's why we eat seeds, because they store food for the first phase in life, and the orchids, we can cut that out because we know there's fungus for us.
Isn't that amazing? What do you think the consequences are? A lot of times on this podcast, we've spoken with researchers that talk about glyphosate and Roundup and different pesticides. Is that a problem for the mushroom population at whole? I mean, when you go to these conferences, is there a talk of that?
Yeah. I mean, mushrooms are... they have the mycelium just out there in the environment, so they're quite sensitive. They will react. Lichens, for example, are used as bioindicators. So lichens is a symbiosis between a mushroom, a fungus, and algae, mostly an algae, or cyanobacteria, and the algae cyanobacteria will absorb sunlight and turn it into sugar, and the mushroom fungus provides the habitat for that to happen. So together they can live in places where either of them cannot survive alone, but together they suddenly have a chance, like high up in the mountains, deserts, rock, and by the way, mushrooms do eat rocks. They release acids that will break down the rock. So do wash your car once in a while, because if you have the lichen on there like we do in the Pacific Northwest, the lichen will eat some of your paint job. I think it's probably not to worry, but I mean, many of you might have turned over a rock and you look under that rock and all you see is that white mesh of a mycelium. And that is a mushroom eating a rock. And of course, it doesn't happen in our time dimensions. It's like you don't see the rock disappearing, but under high resolution microscopy, they could see exactly how the fungus releases the acid and gets out that magnesium or calcium or whatever, potassium, what it wants out of the rock, very targeted, and just pulls that out. So how did I get to the lichen? So they survive in environments where nothing else survives, and
pesticides could affect them.
Pesticides. So thank you. The lichens are used as bioindicators. You can read the quality of your air by the lichen population you have, and that's one of the beauties I always notice when I get out in the forest, and suddenly all these lichens are there too, covering all the branches in the trees, and which in an urban setting there's way less. So in Europe, where people just know their mushrooms much better, and there's also much more research, and the density of higher education institutions is so much higher, that there's probably, I don't know, 100 times more mycologists per whatever square unit than you would find in North America. And so the disappearance of certain species is very evident. And that was already before, climate change got real. And yes, we are very lucky here in the US. We don't have climate change due to the patronage of the Republican Party. But in the rest of the world, it's actually happening and causing problems. And so in Europe, they observed acid rain was a big factor because it would change the soil pH, and then many mushrooms would disappear. And a friend of mine who is a big mushroom dealer, he told me that in places where he as a kid would use to find mushrooms in forests, and we're talking now landscape mosaic where you have fields, forests, these forests between the fields, many of them don't have, the mushroom populations are really reduced. Now you make the effort and you find a big forest, that is hundreds or thousands of hectares, there's still many of these mushrooms, which would indicate, just the blowing from applying these pesticides and fungicides, and all these things will impact the mushrooms. And so it's just so short-sighted. All these toxins in the end kill us, and to think, yes, it cuts corner in agriculture, it makes it so much easier for a farmer not to worry about it, but it's really the solution is so short-sighted and so foolish, because all we do is we poison the soil, and that's what we live off. And most of our soils here have developed for 10,000 years past ice age, and we're using them up as if it's fast food, and we could regenerate that in a year, and we cannot. And same out here in forestry, taking every 30 years all the trees out, that is carbon, nutrients taken out of the environment, and there's no input for that. And then they come with their herbicides and, spray against whatever plants would use all that sudden sunlight. And yeah, it's maddening. Crazy times we live in. And of course, we all do benefit on the other side by having all kinds of things that we think make us happy, which are not producible without ignoring Mother Earth's needs.
Yeah, that's such a good point. You know, it's this intersection between commerce, business, and innovation and protecting the environment, I think, is a big conundrum that a lot of people are trying to grapple with their own lives and so forth. And interestingly, just there's a development just like down the road there, and they cut out all the trees, just like clear cut, and then they have.
And that is Kirkland, Tree City.
Yeah.
Which is absolutely ridiculous.
It's crazy that they allow that. But I saw in the planning they would tag the trees and so forth and say, oh, this one's dead, this one's diseased. And you're like, well, that tree looks totally fine to me. But what's interesting about that is they have this big concrete, very thick, it's about 2 feet thick, massive. It's like the size of a football field to reprocess all the water for the landscape.
Yeah.
So it's like that's how toxic the landscape and the environment going. I mean, they have to like process this stuff and then have like a backup tank.
Yeah.
Just for the landscape of like 30 homes. To me, I was blown away because I couldn't figure out.
Well, it's the runoff, the roof runoff, the retention, water retention. So with the water, they caught on here. But what's happening with the trees is it's so easy, and you know, nobody steps up here in urban settlements. You know, you own a piece of land and you can rape it. Mm-hmm. And the trees is just, I mean, supposedly you could take one big tree a year or so, but for developers that doesn't work. And they ring the trees, they pretend they're dead. Anyways, the mushrooms. The trees won't live without mushrooms, but it's the trees also that will kill the mushroom. So it's all. What the trees that get blown down, usually there's fungus already in there. You know, a branch breaks somewhere, that's where the fungus will come in, and there's always the battle between the mushroom and the tree. And on one side, they can't live with the tree, but on the other side, it might be a different mushroom that takes them out, but it's really the mushroom that limits the age of trees very much so.
It's pretty crazy, the symbiotic relationship. And in terms of like the evolutionary hierarchy, mushrooms have been around a lot longer than plants and animals. Is that right?
On land. They were already on land when plants were still just algae. And they actually, when algae came on land, they had no roots, they had no stems. They were not adapted to living on land. And it was probably the mushrooms who gave them a hand and provided the root system. So they were connecting with the plants having the sugars, and the mushrooms knowing how to extract nutrients out of the land. And so that relationship is really ancient and was crucial for the plants to come on land.
And the animals. Well, then the plants feed the animals.
Right.
And so create this whole...
And the mushroom also feed the animals. Yeah. And the mushrooms will also feed on the animals. So there's one story here. In the Pacific Northwest, though, we have all these great edible mushrooms that native cultures are not as crazy about mushrooms as you would think. You live in the middle of these chanterelle forests. I mean, you know, there should be chanterelle sculptures. And anyways, but one of the stories is that there was noted by natives that in some, I think, Salish traditions, they would leave the corpse in the forest. And then once it was just the bones, then the bones would get a different funeral. And leaving the body out there, you might end up with I think it's a hebeloma, a poison pine mushroom that is growing where all the extra nutrients were brought in. So a decaying animal, human body will be also create a habitat for certain mushrooms which happen to be poisonous. So some speculation in that direction by Paul Kroger in Vancouver, BC, a mycologist too. So maybe that made them unattractive to
native people.
Yeah,
and so forth.
yeah, because of that connection of a certain poisonous mushroom growing where you leave a corpse.
How do certain animals, like I've observed, we have pet pigs and chickens and stuff like that. If we have mushrooms, they don't really eat it. Do certain animals inherently know like which mushrooms are good? Do they ever eat the mushrooms?
Well, the pigs, the king bolete is called porcini in Italian, which pork is right in there. So most of animals do eat, and also. My dad once was hiking and found some king boletes, and he didn't want to take them with him, and he hid them on a pasture. And he comes back, and nearly all of them were eaten by the horses. So who would think horses eat mushrooms? But all the deer do eat mushrooms, and the squirrels are completely crazy about it. And flying squirrels just feed off truffles, and that's probably why the spotted owl is so crazy about them, because they get truffle stuffed squirrels, right?
Wow, I didn't know that.
That's So turtles eat lots of mushrooms too. So it's really, just think of all the invertebrate, the insects, the slugs, and so on. It's crucial, and it's great nutrients. They know that, and some of these mushroom toxins might not work on them. They might have evolutionary selected that it doesn't harm them, and some of them, might work on us. Or for example, chanterelles, you never basically find insects in chanterelles out here, and because they're very powerful in defending themselves against insects, and therefore it's in Lithuania. I saw references that there the people were using dried chanterelles, so alcohol extract. You shouldn't heat them to fight parasites. So you grind them up or make an alcohol extract, and then makes a lot of sense, because they never get overpowered, and you look at a lot of other mushrooms that get completely eaten, have all the maggots in there and so on. So like here, that little mesh I brought you, which is the leftovers of a eaten king bolete porcini, and the maggots been in there, and so we're gonna spread that here. There's a spruce tree out there, and this mushroom associates with a spruce tree and oak trees, and there's no guarantee, there's no sound science that says we can spread the mushroom, but there is hearsay, anecdotal evidence by mycologists who report how they were spreading that in their yard, and then don't know, was it the one I spread 3 years ago, or was it the one I spread 20 years ago? But suddenly a porcini showed up in an area where it's not native, but the guy brought it into his backyard and spread it there. So
that's cool.
Little enrichment planting.
Oh, it's awesome. Yeah, I want to get the these conchs. The polypore, the red worm polypore. I have some. What is it? It was a Douglas fir that's down. With that associated with that?
Absolutely. That's what's going to be on there. And if you want to make sure it's going to grow out of it, you could just take, when you have a fresh one, you take a piece out of the tissue and you do a little cut in there and put it in there, and then it probably will take over. But maybe even if you just put a fresh fruiting body there, that it still will drop some spores. You have a lighter?
We could get one after, to test it. You want to
right? So I didn't get to that, but the red-belted conch will bubble when you put a lighter to it, and then it will have fine bubbles, and that helps to identify it too. So I was talking about the fruity, citrusy odor. Then it's really bitter, has a white pores here, and then these concentric dark to white, but with a red, often a red ring, but not always. And then you have your red-belted conch.
It makes great tea. My wife and I have been drinking the tea.
You do? It's really bitter. You like it?
We do like it. I think it's good for the gut. I was doing some research on it, after getting your field guide, which is great, guys. And I'll put a link in the bio below. These field guides are amazing.
This is my opportunity, is it?
Let's talk about it. Yeah, I really want to promote this, because I want people to make their own medicine and be able to go out in the forest and have fun with their families. So
and with the red-belted conch, it's so abundant, we don't have to worry about sustainability. With the ganodermas, they are annual fruiting bodies. So if you pick them late in the season and they have already spread their spores, hey, that's the only one missing out is the insects who feed on it. But the fungal organism has taken care of reproduction, and then we can make our extracts. Turkey tails, really great, very abundant fruiting, especially on out here, Pacific Northwest, apple trees, but alders too. So usually deciduous stuff, and fairly easy to identify. No dangerous lookalikes, and you quickly get an idea also for their taste. I like to just in the wild, I chew a little bit like a forest chewing gum, and you can make a nice stock out of it. So you collect a whole bunch, and then you just do a hot water and get it maybe 10 minutes boils help to get the polysaccharides, loosen them up, solve them, and then you can simmer it for a couple much longer time to reduce it, and then I make ice cubes out of it. And so when I do a smoothie or when I do a sauce or soup, I just put them in, and they don't have the bitterness. I'm sure the bitterness has some health benefits too in all the other mushrooms, but turkey tails are really easy to incorporate that way. And of course, you could also powder them and then use the powder in your cooking, because they have a nice fungal taste, but the structure, they're just too leathery to enjoy them as regular food. I mean, if you cut them really thin and slicey, maybe I got to experiment with that, but there could be some like crunchy treat that way.
Yeah.
But, there's one mushroom in Yunnan, gambajun, which is earth fan, Thelaphora, which nobody would touch here and eat. And I tried the relatives here, and they really didn't work. They were awful. But in Yunnan, this earth fan, and it's really leathery, they pay more for that than for the matsutake. And it's just like, how do you eat that? Well, they were slicing it really fine and then frying it in oil. And I didn't get it, I have to admit. But that's, their most special local speciality in regard of mushrooms. And Yunnan is unique. There's no place on this globe where people are so mushroom obsessed. And
where is that?
It's in the southwest of China.
Okay.
And it's a multi-ethnic area. So the Han people came later, and there's still, I don't know, maybe 20 different ethnic groups, and many of them have their own mushroom cultures. And so it's a very interesting place, and very mountainous, and it goes from tropical to glaciers. So it's just, it's one of the total biodiversity hotspots.
Isn't that where Cordyceps is often harvested too? Is that the same area?
Yeah. So in the mountains in Yunnan, there is where you already find the Tibetan Cordyceps, and so that's how Cordyceps is this crazy insect parasite that will grow a fruiting body out of an insect, and it first controls the insects and the movements of the insects, and
while it's still alive.
Yeah.
Oh my
it
God.
directs it into the place where it's optimal to spread its spores. So it takes over the organism, and till a year ago, we thought it takes over the mind of the insect, but it turns, the latest research was that it takes over the muscular system. So it grows the mycelium along the muscles, if insects have muscles, I don't know, and then they manipulate them, and so they look drunken when they move. Cordyceps doesn't graciously move the insect, and then they get them in the position where they want them. Like many ants that get infected will climb up till the end of a branch, and then they bite into that, and then the fungus will cut whatever muscles would open the jaw, the mandible, and then they are stuck there. And then, that's the end of the insect, and then the fruiting body, the insect will grow, the fungus will grow throughout the body of the insect and turn everything into fungal tissue, and then grows the fruiting body and spreads the spores in hope to land on the next insect. And when it lands on an insect, it's a little sticky, and then it will grow one of the hyphae, one fine thread, and that will drill into the exoskeleton of the insect, and it will release the enzyme, the chitinase, that softens the tissue. So on the hard shell of an insect, it doesn't get in. That's too well protected, but it's the softer tissue, joint-like areas where it will get in, and then it takes over. Or sometimes it can come in also as with a food source or so, apparently. But it's very tricky. Yeah,
that is so fascinating.
And
it's good for us. It's good for our immune system.
Yeah, well, there's one that's really bad for our immune system, and that's Cyclosporine. The drug is made out of a cordyceps, and that suppresses our immune system, which we need when we get an organ transplant. So before they had figured out cyclosporine, organ transplant had a success rate from about 10 to 20%. And then cyclosporine was discovered. It was a soil fungus. It has a life form as a soil fungus and a face as a insect parasite. And it showed these immunosuppressant powers. And then once they had cyclosporine, then organ transplants had a success rate of 70 to 80%. So complete game changer. And the numbers of organ transplants, you know, just completely changed because suddenly you had a real good chance to survive, which without cyclosporine you had not. So this is not a good drug when you're healthy. This is when you get an organ, and then it's an incredible helpful drug. But other cordyceps seem to be really supportive to our immune system, stimulated. And many of these mushrooms, like ganoderma too, won't just boost your immune system, but will help it to balance. So if your immune system is overreacting, like autoimmune diseases, you know, it seems to inform your immune system to tone it down. And if it's underperforming,
bring it up.
Bring it up. So that's, I mean, just that there's that kind of intelligence there is I don't know how, you know, I'm just repeating what I've been told by people I really trust as a source. Yeah. We do believe in science, don't we? Right? And the cordyceps being overpowering insect immune systems has a lot of fascinating powers. And then the other thing in cordyceps is that it has cordycepin, the active ingredient in cordyceps, is one oxygen only different to adenosine, which is ATP is the source or something very close to it, which fuels our cells. And
to move your muscles. That's
right,
yeah.
right. So it looks like that our cells can pull in the cordycepin and fuel it. So fuel our cells. And in traditional Chinese medicine, I mean, the Tibetans discovered that stuff, but then the Chinese got it and they got just much more crazy about it. They were just saying this is the best when your body's really exhausted, you know, and you know, you can't bring vitality, energy back to your body. This is really the thing when you burned out, and you know, the cordyceps will nurture you back to health. So you know, that's many old Chinese. When you have money, that's how you buy youth, with cordyceps.
That's right. You were saying it was like $70 a pound or something crazy.
$70,000 a pound.
Oh my God.
Well, you can get it. That's exaggerated. $30,000 a pound for the best quality, and you don't. You know, a pound will last you, but it's just crazy prices. So there's a whole bunch of products on the market that are not the Tibetan stuff, though they like to use the name of the Tibetan cordyceps, but it's a different thing. But a lot of the medical research has been done with the fungus that is probably a parasite on the cordyceps. And so there is cordycepin in there. And cordycepin, there is reliable research out of Nottingham University that has shown that it is stops cancer cell reproduction. And they have mapped out the whole pathways. And the other thing, they've did another study on cordycepin and showed it as a very powerful antioxidant, anti-inflammatory, where, you know, their conclusion was then this is really something that needs to be looked into seriously and develop a drug out of it. And this is Cordyceps militaris, has also cordycepin, so you don't need the expensive Tibetan stuff. And that is now grown on industrial scale. So when I get to China for my mushroom adventures, I take the people to the market and we can buy a pound of fresh cordyceps just grown, harvested the day before, and that's $1.50 or $2.
Oh, wow.
And it's nice, intense orange, good structure, nice fungal taste, and then we'll take that to a restaurant and have them cook it up for us. And yeah, so it's nice cool that there's an affordable alternative. It doesn't have a long history as a medicinal, but people just got into that, and apparently it does the trick too, and it can be cultivated. And the Tibetan stuff, they're working hard. They're spending millions, tens of millions each year, and they're getting there.
To try and cultivate it so you don't have to follow the beetles around and everything.
Yeah. So they did.
Wow.
They can't produce the larvae. That's the bottleneck. But so, anyways.
That's a fascinating story about how this fungus is able to control the muscular system of the beetles. Yeah. So it brings up a question. Paul Stamets, right? Stamets has talked about the kind of the innate intelligence of mushrooms and how mushroom eaters might become more connected and things like that. And we hear about that with psychedelics. Do you think that's true with maybe conchs or ganoderma or things like that?
Well, I mean, I'm more connected to the forest because I love mushrooms, and my connection to the forest is definitely also expressed through the mushrooms. Now, I might lacking sensitivity to speak for, or maybe I haven't taken enough magic mushrooms that I really came to that conclusion. So, but I'm sure, interesting, like in the Americas, a lot of indigenous groups are not crazy about mushrooms, but the area where people really know their mushrooms, and lots of them, is in Central America, where part of the traditional religion is the magic mushrooms. So that clearly shows that through the involvement with the organism, a lot of the fear was overcome and the curiosity was developed in mushrooms, while in many other areas people were just much more careful. And so mushrooms connect everything out in the forest. It is mushrooms that will move. Big old trees are connected. I mean, every tree is connected to dozens of different mushrooms, hundreds of species. And the same mushroom will be also connected to other trees of the same species or completely different. And they will transfer sugars from the big tree to little trees. The sugars, the little tree, often like a little hemlock out here, can be 200 years old, but not more than 30 feet. And it's just waiting there till the big one comes down. And then at UBC in Vancouver, Susan, forgot her family name, she had that great idea. She did studies on that, and they put a plastic black cover over these trees, which tried out with their houseplants. They will die right away. So they put the plastic tarps over these little old trees, protected them, shielded them completely from sunlight, which every tree needs to live, and these trees wouldn't die. I think they had the cover for 3 months up there, which really shows that tree was only kept alive by the fungus that takes sugars from the big guys and keeps the little guy alive for the moment when the big one comes down. Now that sounds awfully socialist. I know, you know. So in the early years of this research into ectomycorrhizals and this symbiotic stuff, I heard somewhere that the US, it was really hard to get funding. You know, what? The big one supports the little one? That can't be. That's not what we heard about evolution and Darwin, right?
Yeah.
The big one extracts the little one. So anyways, it's the mushroom manages the ecosystem and thinks apparently into the future, you know, keeping little trees alive for the moment where the big one comes down. That seems
pretty intelligent.
Very intelligent to me. I think our main problem about seeing intelligence in the environment around us is our own ignorance and thinking we are so special and that we are so caught in our mental thought process that cuts us off from what's around us. And I do speak from experience. You know, it's just, yes, we have developed incredible intellectual powers, but there was a price for it. And the price is we fell out of the here and now, and we got disconnected from what's around us. And that's what animals and plants just have a whole different awareness and presence. And right now, everybody is paying the price for our intelligence because we don't see really what we're doing around us. So
yeah. And there's a lot of depression, anxiety, uncertainty, suicide, a lot of that. And you know, and it's funny that people are using mushrooms to help to calm themselves down or alleviate some of these feelings of uncertainty or, you know, detachment from the world around us. And did you get into mushrooms by way of psychedelics? Because I know a lot of people kind of do that way. Or your family, you were harvesting mushrooms.
I grew up hunting mushrooms, but then of course, when I heard about magic mushrooms, I got totally excited. And so, I don't know, 16, 15 or so. And my dear twin brother and I, we ate all kinds of little brown mushrooms. We made sure that we didn't have deadly gallerinas, the death bell. Yeah, I have that in there.
You have that because those look very much like cyanescence, right?
Yeah. It's mentioned in here, not depicted, but in the edible mushrooms of the Pacific Northwest. And these days, you have one name in a field guide. You just look it up online.
Yeah.
So these are really portable for being out in the woods, but when that you know what you take and what you're looking for, and then at home you just go online and you get so many more images, and it's you got to combine that. That's so helpful. When I first got here over 20 years ago, there was one mushroom book for the area, and that had one picture. And try to identify a mushroom by one picture, it's just like you have a picture of a 12-year-old, and now you want to recognize that 12-year-old by a picture of a 54-year-old who just partied hard last night and looks like a mess. It's really nice. You pull up, 20 images or so, look at them, and what you have should fit in there. If it doesn't, it's not. Don't force it, because that you really might regret that. So, that's really the thing. You got to be discerning. You got to be careful, and you got to build up your confidence. And that you don't have any confidence in the beginning, that's a good thing, because you don't know yet. But you can learn it, and just like you managed to know what a blackberry is, you can manage what a chanterelle is, or a red-belted Kong, or whatever, It takes time, but of course, if you want to know hundreds of mushrooms, that takes serious dedication. And but there's people out here who can know 90% of the mushrooms you put under their nose.
Wow.
It's very few. It usually takes special memory capacity to have all these names. But there's many people who can, who give me a moment.
Pretty intelligent.
Yeah, and I'll find out. So, it's
fascinating. Is there any foolproof way to identify a psychedelic? I heard that the cap, if it's kind of that gelatinous cap that pulls apart,
there's some of them that have a gelatinous partial veil, and others don't have that, have a fibrous one. So we're talking under the cap of the mushroom. Let's take a shiitake, if I may. It's dry. It won't grow anymore. So we're looking here at the cap and the stem, and under the cap, a whole bunch of mushrooms have a partial veil, means they have a skin that protects it before it opens up. And there's a couple psilocybe that have a little bit of a gelatinous ring there, and others that are fibrous, like cyanescence, the wavy cap, that would have fine fibers there.
Okay.
So there's difference between the one. The easy take-home message, or as I always phrase it, you pick a magic mushroom and you broke the law. So we gotta make sure everybody can identify magic mushrooms, so we don't break the law when we don't want to do, or when we shouldn't, right? So when you look at little brown mushrooms, no bluing, no magic. So there would be when you touch them, within a minute or 2 minutes, there's an oxidation happening. And that bluing will really help you to identify a magic mushroom. But that only works with little brown mushrooms. There's a whole bunch of other mushrooms that will blue too, but that's a different chemical process, and they're not little brown mushrooms. Okay. But do never ever take a little brown mushroom that is not blue staining, especially out here where some of our most common magic mushrooms grow on wood chips. That's the same habitat as some of the deadly gallerinas or the fiber caps, the inosebes, that are very unpleasant as a poisoning.
Because they cause organ failure, right?
Inosebe, it kills little kids, but grown-ups, it's you sweat and muscarine is the active ingredients, and so you will lose liquid through all orifices, and feel really miserable. As a grown-up, you usually would survive, but there's very few little brown mushrooms. In general, we don't eat little brown mushrooms, and as an expert, there's a handful of them that can be enjoyed as edibles, but in general, because of the risk, we stay away from them. So.
Yeah. What was unique is when I found some cyanescence, I was so excited. about it, and it didn't stain purple for like 5 minutes because I thought, oh, it really has wavy caps, and I thought it was honey, and then whatever, and then it started to turn purple. So you have to be a little bit patient for that. Maybe it was a humid day or whatever.
Patience with mushrooms is always a good thing, especially when you don't know. And with guild mushrooms, what you want to do is a spore print. So you just take the cap, and whether you put a hole in a paper and put it in, or you cut off, break off the stem, and you put the cap down, and then patience, right? 6-8 hours later, maybe 4 hours later, when you're lucky, you get a spore print, and that spore print will have a color, and that really helps you. So the psilocybe have a very dark, purplish, blackish spore print, and the deadly gallerinas are on the brown side. So that's something already, there's a difference. But so, you just, little brown mushroom is a high-risk gamble, and, the statistic tells us most people manage, but just be careful. And season is usually late October, November. Wood chip is the easiest habitat.
Yeah, they like the alder. What's up with alder?
Well, what cyanescence likes deciduous trees. So we have so many conifers out here, and so lots of our wood chips are conifers. They're Douglas fir, hemlocks, cedar, which the fungus might eat a little bit, but it doesn't like to fruit on. So to fruit, it's really alder or oak, elm, whatever, deciduous wood is really what they like. So people who love seeing them grow somewhere, they might just put a bucket of wood chips on top, and that's where they then will fruit next year. You don't need to do much. You just add some of the food of the mushroom, and then,
off for running,
moisture,
What about the rhododendron bushes? Why do they like rhododendrons? Or is it rhododendrons, or don't they like something?
What do you mean? We have lots of planted rhododendrons here,
For the psychedelic?
I don't know, but probably the wood of rhododendrons might work perfectly fine too. So the conifers have a whole bunch of different chemicals. They have all the resin in there, which they use to defend themselves against fungi. So apparently it works with the genus Psilocybe that they're not happy about conifers, at least some of them, and so rhododendron doesn't have that kind of resins in there, and therefore the mushroom might have an easy time to digest it. But I'm not a cultivator. I'm a treasure hunter.
That's good.
So we got to have somebody else to answer these questions.
No, it's good, Daniel. Man, we could talk all day about this stuff. I think it's super fascinating. So I put the links right below this video or in the description, guys, for your field guides. And then you also do tours, which I think is cool.
Yeah, let me do the field guides. What I have special about a field guide, so I have one for the Pacific Northwest. I have one for California out. And then with Robert Rogers, who is really... he really knows the medicinal mushrooms in North America. He's been into it for decades, and he's an herbalist and professional, worked as a naturopath, using medicinal mushrooms to treat and heal people. Really amazing. He did mushroom essences where he did like Bach flower essences with mushrooms.
Wow, that's amazing.
And, and a lot of people give like, oh, this is such a humbug, and give flack about this kind of stuff. And not the ones who had healing experiences, but the people who just can't imagine how could that work. Anyways, he even went in that direction with fungus. And so Robert is the medicine man. I'm the mushroom man in here. So it's mostly my pictures and the descriptions. And it has also a section in here, how do you make your own extracts and teas? And of course, online you get 20 other suggestions too, and that's good. You just check out what you like and how you want to do it. But what I do in my field guides, I put a symbol to the mushrooms that tells you easy to identify, moderate, or difficult. So when you see easy to identify, using these little field guides, you already halfway there. I mean, you have a picture, you have a description, you got to make sure that you understand the description and you have the match. Then it works with such a field guide. When it says moderate, well, definitely get out some other resources. And when it says difficult, no, you gotta do some work, and you better also often ask for help.
Because of lookalikes.
Lookalikes, yes. That's always the point, is because you have to make, there's just too many mushrooms that have a lot of the same characteristics. And to really see the difference, you know, it takes a lot of experience. And sometimes there's just certain tricks, like between the really poisonous Amanita and the choice Matsutake, the odor. You know the odor of a Matsutake, you're 100% safe. You don't know the odor, ooh, you're really gambling. This is not where you don't go there. It's way too risky. But then you also can just, when you squish the Matsutake, you cannot break it really with 2 fingers, while the Amanita will break. So, you know, there's this, and these things are always, that's then between, you know, a specific mushroom you want and the poisonous lookalike. So that doesn't work for other mushrooms, you know. So you got to know with each mushrooms you have you can have a handful of tricks or special knowledge that say, okay, that's it. So that's really what in these field guides, I try to keep it simple and, you know, and focus on really the interesting stuff, not everything that's out there. And then I have also one out for California. And I can always, when I get orders, I know, oh, it rained. You know, that's the first year I was like so frustrated. The Pacific Northwest field guide, I think it sold over 15,000 copies or so.
Wow, that's amazing.
You know, and then in California, just nothing happened. And I thought, damn it, what's going on? And then I realized, well, it didn't rain. And once the rains came, you know, okay, then I got orders. That's so anyways, this you'll find that on my webpage. And also, I interrupted you when you started to talk about my mushroom adventures.
Oh, no. Yeah, I wanted to share that. But guys, so I keep these in the glove compartment of my car. So when I go hiking.
That's the place,
And because then you just have it right there. You put it in your backpack. Very affordable, very reasonable. But it's just nice to have so that if you're out, so you can start to identify things that you're seeing when you're hiking with your family or walking your dogs.
And just don't expect that you can identify everything.
Right.
It's an art, and certain things are easy. Other things are really difficult. And everybody who is into mushroom knows how maddening the beginning is. And it's but you know, you persistent, you get there, and you know certain things, and you admit there's many things I don't know, and don't beat yourself up over that.
Well, it makes hiking more fun because I used to hike with headphones and earphones, listen to audiobooks, and like, oh, I gotta like be busy and hustle and all that. And now it's like, you know, I can just enjoy the forest and kind of stay mindful as I'm walking, looking around, and then that adds a new element. You know, one of the things we talk about, like with aging to prevent mild cognitive impairment, cognitive decline, is to keep the brain, you know, sharpen the saw. And knowing your mushrooms, what a great way to sharpen. And
hericium, the lion's mane, which shows that it helps nerve cell regeneration. So there's even double-blind studies for memory capacity going up 10-15% for elderly people.
Wow.
I mean, really, nerve issues, some people, anecdotal evidence, Parkinson, shaking, that the shaking has been reduced taking that stuff. I mean, really something we need, you know, people with money to really look into that. But hey, we can. That's the beauty about medicinal mushrooms. You know, for $30 a month, $40 a month, you see if it does something for you. And if it does, you found a really nice way to treat yourself with very little side effects or none. And if it doesn't work, what kind of
$30, big deal.
But you know, I mean, people with very sensitive systems can tell very quickly such things. But if you have a system like I would have, you know, you got 6 weeks, 3 months, it takes time. And so give it a time and see if it makes a difference. And I think in this context also with the magic mushrooms is people who have serious migraines and cluster headaches. And no, I'm not gonna, I don't know where to get them. And Mother Nature provides, as Paul Stamets says nicely. So you gotta find them, you gotta find your way how to find them. That's not my job. But people with migraines and cluster headaches and so on, some of them, a dose that is below detection, microdosing, has taken that away for them.
That's amazing.
And we don't have anybody that could say that's happened. Well, we probably would have some people who were trying to use them as psychedelics, and it worked for them. But the medicinal knowledge is pretty recent, and I'm sure we'll get some studies on that. And so, you know, if it can be that easy, and even if it's just 5% of the people, but for these 5%, wow, what a difference it would make.
Because a cluster headache or migraine is pretty debilitating for people. So.
It's you could even the economics calculate the work days lost and so on. Yeah,
it's crazy. Well, that's cool. So you do tours. I mean, if people want to take that next step, it's mushrooming.com. It's right below. Everyone listening in the iTunes, it'll be in the show notes. But so if someone wanted to go to South America, or where do you go? Like,
so I do a couple things. So I started 12 years ago mushrooming after taking a bunch of mushroom experts to Tibet. So that's so much fun. And I already worked as a tour guide. I was back then environmental work in Tibet. And so with that specialization, I was a tour guide. And then I just started mushroom tours with focus on mushrooms, but not just mushrooms. I mean, we don't travel halfway around the world to not see the forest for its trees, right? Or is it the other way around? Whatever. We do mushrooms. We have days where we're just out there looking for mushrooms. But like right now, this year, next year, I'm doing Bhutan. And well, of course, we go to see the monasteries and the culture, meet the people, stay in people's homes, eat mushrooms with them, collect mushrooms with them. In the rainforest, there's moments where nobody thinks about mushrooms. When you watch a bunch of parrots or monkeys or so, it's not about the mushrooms in that moment. There's so much to see. I mean, the vitality of life and so much to experience. So what I really love about it, it's curious people who have a lot of diversity in their interests. Because usually here in the US, you can say people who are interested in mushrooms, since there's fungophobia, these are people who checked out a lot of things and then ended up with mushrooms. Now, in Europe, mushroom people are not necessarily super eccentric or it's much different segment of society. It's much more a traditional thing, And then on the other side, I this year organized a gourmet morel weekend where we feasted, invited a chef, and we went morel hunting and truffle outings. Then people sometimes I go out and take small groups, mushroom huntings, and then I do a lot of things with the mycological societies. So we have shows and forays, and I take people out there and do classes, and I call myself I'm an honorary consul of the fungal kingdom.
That's awesome.
And so it's just spreading the fungal gospel is I'm very lucky that I can do what I love, and there's a real need for it, and it's really picking up. The interest is just growing, and people realize we have ignored the kingdom of fungi, and they can give us so much, and they're so critical in life. Life without fungi is not going to happen, and it just took such a long time because they have a quite different lifestyle, and so much of it is hidden. It's underground. It's not the places where we see them. Well, that's mating season when they show up.
That's amazing. Yeah, just the fruiting bodies. Wow. So guys, definitely check that out in the links below. And then it's kind of a final few questions. If there was just one mushroom that you could eat for the rest of your life, like all others are going to be illegal or whatever, hypothetically, what one would that be and why?
Well, that would be between the king bolete, the porcini, and the chanterelle. And I love the taste. I mean, I prefer the taste of the king porcini, of the king bolete to the chanterelle, but the chanterelle has that awesome consistency and that apricot odor. Yeah. So don't force me to decide between them. Yeah. But when it comes to taking pictures and researching, it is cordyceps. Yeah. So it's really
because of its bright orange color.
Well, many colors, many shapes, and then with the insect host, so you get an insect on top of your fungus, and it's just so bizarre and so different. And then it has also this medicinal quality. It's there's so much cool stuff out there.
Yeah.
And for us out here in the Pacific Northwest, I mean, we wait all year for the summer, right? And then finally summer is here, and what a gorgeous place. And then, many people, oh man, summer's over, it's depressing, it's gonna rain, fall's coming, winter. And for me, it's like, no. Yeah, summer is great, but mushrooms are happening now. So I'm so relieved when it's finally winter, in December, it's like, oh yeah, now I can kick back, you know. But it's nice, you know, when you have seasonal stuff too, and where it's not all about summer.
Yeah, to look something to look forward to. That's really great. You know, so if you were to speak to a politician about you know, the future of psychedelic mushrooms and so forth, being that they're illegal, I mean, there's other drugs. Alcohol is very, you know, addictive.
Which is a fungus too that makes the alcohol.
Ah, I didn't realize that.
The yeast, yeah, it's of course
right. Anything fermented,
yeah, it's always fungus.
Do you think psychedelics are habit forming in the sense that people are going to wake up and not go to school, not go to work? They're going to destroy their relationships.
They're less addictive than TV and psychedelics, and I never met anybody who turned their psychedelics into a habit. And yes, it is a profound experience, and there's always somebody who you know,
went off the rails.
Doesn't know how to manage it. But in general, I think the only crime is really that it's not available as medicine. And I'm optimistic that we'll make it, that the medicinal use of especially magic mushrooms, that will come. The promising results that have been shown, Johns Hopkins University studies treating alcoholism, other addictions, post-traumatic stress disorder, serious depressions, that's just, you can't ignore that. And especially because of the post-traumatic stress disorders, which when we think how many lives are ruined, how many lives are taken, murders, killing happening by people impacted from post-traumatic stress disorder. And if we have anything that can help people and help these families that suffer under somebody impacted by it, we can't ignore that. And that's why I'm cautiously optimistic that within the next decade, we'll definitely have a change, and that the medicinal powers will be used and totally for the better of society. It's something that opens you up. And most of our psychopharmas, they shut you down, which can be very helpful if you have
pain
and you're connected to, you hear voices you can't deal with. But something that opens your heart, I mean, that's what all we need, you know. We don't need more walls. We need to open up, you know. We need and that's where these mushrooms apparently can help people, and to ignore that is foolish, and it doesn't work, as we can see, you know.
People are doing it anyway.
The war on drugs has been fought for how long? You know, it is clearly not a winning battle for the people who think there's a justification for outlawing psychedelics and marijuana for that, but what we really need to do is people need to have true information. There's risks, you know. Addictions can happen, not with magic mushrooms, I think, but you know. Anyways, there's dangers. If you have already like psychosis running in the family, this could be a moment to trigger that. So, you know, if there's a genetic disposition for that, you know, better stay away. Yeah.
Too much of a good thing, maybe, in that scenario.
Do
you think the government does not want? There's people, maybe insiders within the government and so forth, just kind of a conspiracy theory potentially, but that they don't want the masses taking these psychoactive substances because it might make them more enlightened and more connected. I mean, is that maybe part of the reason why they're being?
You know, I believe in one big or two conspiracies. One is ignorance, and the other one is greed. And when you look at the history of criminalization of marijuana, I mean, the breweries were a big factor in there, and also the police departments who wanted that extra funding they lost after the prohibition. So I think these forces are much more real, and you know, if it's a nicer worldview. You know, I don't need to look in that the main conspiracy is to keep us stupid, but it's definitely the conspiracy is to keep everybody keep working and working for others and somebody siphoning off that money. And a TV addiction and an alcohol habit definitely helps to keep people happy in their small world, and instead of questioning the whole, existence. So yes,
that's such a good point.
I mean, that's what our schools should do.
Yeah.
We should much more look into what makes us happy. What is the human condition about? And instead of just turning us into cogs, and that's there's the interest to keep us as cogs in the system, so we don't disrupt, and people woken up and questioning materialism and violent authoritarian approaches instead of dialogue it's harder to control people who have an experience of being connected to each other, to Mother Nature. A profound experience are much harder to control than people who are disconnected and who just
self-medicate.
escape. Self-medicated escape. Yeah.
Wow.
Gee.
Yeah, it's profound. Yeah, it's really interesting. So, do you think alcohol sales would go down if mushrooms were like pot? And like if there was a mushroom dispensary, do you think alcohol sales would go down? Because I know from just a few microdosage, my craving for wine, I like kombucha beer.
Yeah.
But when I drink it, it doesn't taste as good to me. It's like, I used to just love the taste, and now I'm like, I can take it or leave it. And I don't know if it's...
when I smoked some pot, I can't handle beer. It's like I'm not interested at all in the taste, and I'm not much of a beer drinker in the first place. But yeah, it would cut into alcohol, and but if business is what you do, so then you move some of your assets into the next thing. If this is what you're doing, and yes, but I mean, supposedly painkillers have suffered from CBD out there. I don't know, and it's really not. That's not where my attention is. And these forces are real, and the breweries definitely want to have their market share, and any alternative to beer is a threat. But the times are also changing, and I mean, we know the science is 100% clear. Alcohol is causing the most trouble, most devastating of all drugs. And yes, 90% of the people don't ruin their lives with it, but there's a small amount of people who cannot handle it, and still they get legal access. And show me the society that doesn't have drugs. I mean, the human condition comes with limitations, comes with pain. There's no way around it. And if there's pain medication, we're gonna go for it. And if it's done responsible, fine. But we got to be educated about all these things and know the impact, long-term, short-term, the price we pay, be it physically, be it spiritual, emotional, all these things,
Yeah, great tip.
Hey, we were supposed to talk about mushroom here.
Yeah, I know. We're getting off topic, but we have a lot of questions here. So let's make sure that we address some of these questions for folks that have been patiently with us for the past hour and 13 minutes.
You mean somebody was listening to us?
But yeah, believe it or not, people actually were tuning in. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, it was that interesting. So let's just see. Let me zoom in here and we can kind of get into some of the questions. Oh, man, we got a lot of questions here. Okay. So real quick, because I'm going to pull out the audio, put it in iTunes. If folks want to connect with you, it's mushroaming.com.
Mushroaming. We roam for mushrooms, yeah.
Roam for mushrooms. And then, or just Google Daniel Winkler.
Put mushrooms there.
Daniel Winkler mushrooms. Yeah, that's why I got the image for the thumbnail of this talk. Was that Daniel Winkler mushrooms. All right, so someone says, I love the title. I know you were like, mushrooms, they're more like animal than plant, because so many people are just fired up in this carnivorous diet.
I should make the plug too. Mushrooms are just a great food source, and just eating tons of meat is not very sustainable. And I'm sorry to say that. Yes, my long distance travel is not very sustainable too. So we all make our decisions. But mushrooms are just an awesome alternative to meat, and I love meat. But I use it often as a treat or not that often, but then it's a real treat. And mushrooms, I don't have second thoughts, though I kill another organism to feed myself. There's no way around it. Plants are sentient beings too. We eat them, and to say I don't eat, we have to feed our system. We will take out other beings. That's just
part of the cycle of life.
Yeah, there's no way around.
Yeah.
Just be grateful and be aware when you do it.
Right. No, it's true. But yeah, the movement towards all meat diet, I think maybe it isn't sustainable. And I mean, I think it has healing properties for some people if they have autoimmunity or whatever. Yeah. But then maybe get your once you get your immune system balanced, your gut balance, and maybe it's time to diversify a little bit in the foods. So let's just see here. Let me zoom in here. Let's see. People are saying they're hungry. They love to talk. Never heard of skin toxic mushrooms. So I think that was when you were talking about you can taste it.
We don't know about 99.9% of the mushrooms, when you touch them, won't cause any skin reaction. Like we have a few plants that give you blisters, like dogbane or so. There's a couple really nasty things, or then the
poison ivy and that.
Yeah, a carrot family too, Apiaceae, the hemlock. So there's stuff that causes a lot, but with mushrooms we don't have it. You get skin problems when you eat raw or undercooked shiitake, and that looks like whiplashing, often on your back. Shiitake, do not eat them raw.
Good tip. Okay. Most people probably don't eat that raw. Oh, I did drop some to the testing. All right, we got the microphone. We got the audio back here. All right. Let's see here. People say that mushrooms made them happy. Heard of deadly shrooms causing liver damage and so forth. That's why you get the field guides that to avoid.
Well, we have a handful of deadly mushrooms. It's very few, and the ones that really kill people, like the death cap and so on, you can get to know them fairly easy. The point is, if you don't know, when in doubt, throw it out. Do never, ever eat something you don't know. Just like you don't take somebody home overnight. You have no idea who they are, And same with the unknown mushroom. So luckily, we have very few mushroom deaths in this country. And most of the people who die from mushrooms are the ones who never looked up what they were eaten. Or, it's like, I used to eat them with grandma 40 years ago. And then there's a small group of immigrants from Southeast Asia that have a deadly look-alike. They think they eat a white Caesar, and it happens to be death cap here.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Okay. Just a lot of great comments. People are engaging a lot. So Joshua Webb, really appreciate all your feedback there. Larissa, she just made mushroom soup, which is really, really cool.
Yeah.
We'll go back and we can kind of review these. People are talking about how it's cool that we're open and talking about microdosing mushrooms, which is great. So I think that's it, guys. Really, really appreciate all of you being here. If you enjoyed this, hit that like button. Definitely go over to Daniel's website, support his work. Like I said, I have these in my car, in my truck, so when we're out going hiking with my dogs and daughters, I can know what to look for.
And when you're in Canada, you got to order it from Robert Rogers' webpage.
Okay.
So he'll be very happy. It's a corporation, but I'm down here in the US, so I'll do the US distribution.
Yeah.
Or if you somewhere else, I do mail international, no problem.
Cool. That's great.
And if you wholesale interested, I'm the source.
Yeah, reach out. Internet. Yeah. We do have a lot of folks in Australia and other parts of Europe that tune in, so that'd be cool.
Yeah.
So Daniel, really appreciate your work and appreciate your
Thank
insights.
you so much for having me.
Yeah, this was a lot of fun. So appreciate you guys being here. Hope you have a
Thank
great
you so
Thanksgiving.
Much. All the best.
We'll catch you soon. Bye-bye.